Okay, this was a hard series to do. One thing I always heard about Hibiki when I was getting into Kamen Rider and looking into the older Heisei era stuff was that this series in particular was weird, odd in a way, and is honestly heavily debated in the fandom if Hibiki was intended to be a Kamen Rider season. As well, there's a lot of evidence for it not originally being one. But we're not here to debate that. Hibiki was aired under the banner of the Kamen Rider franchise, and as such is treated as a member of the family of the Kamen Rider franchise. So I consider it a Kamen Rider season, even if it, feels at points like it really isn't one. Even as I say that, Hibiki is still very different from most other Rider series. For one thing, this series has a much slower pace than even your typical slowest Rider season, which outside of Hibiki for me would probably be Deno. That had a pretty slow start. This one has a slower start. I honestly don't feel the plot even gets going within the first few episodes, in all honesty. It's slower paced. There's a lot more focus on character development and small character moments, as well as music. Music is a very big thing of Hibiki. Not music in traditional sense, mind you, just sound. The series even opens up with a musical number where the sound of students going to school in the morning is used as the music for the musical number. And again, sound is heavily emphasized. More natural sounds, what's that word? Ambivalent sounds, stuff like that you would hear just walking along the street corner or just walking down the road or something like that. And even the fights, which are Kamen Rider's hallmarks, they're very much small parts of the episode. And typically, yes, that is a typical thing for most episodes. But even then, even if there's only one fight in an episode, all the bombast and super important stuff is happening around that fight. While in Hibiki, the fight is just another part of these characters' lives. It's just like literally exterminating an animal or a pest in this case. And, well, you could honestly argue that Hibiki is the most character-focused Rider show out of the entire franchise, which is weird considering the fact that Kamen Rider is a very character-based series. But we've danced around the plot enough, so let's actually talk about said plot. In the world of Hibiki, decade joke, the Kamen Riders are Oni fight against the Makumo. And I say are Oni because they're more referred to as Oni, which, for those of you who obviously know because it's become cultural knowledge by this point, Oni is a Japanese term relative to a specific type of demon. Although in this case, the Kamen Riders turn into Oni, or the Kamen Riders are Oni who use their powers to fight against even more evil demons, or at least they take on the power of an Oni to fight against demons. Going back to the whole premise of losing your humanity for the greater good, that's been with Kamen Rider since, well, Ichigo. Anyway, this battle has been going on for a while now, for at least a few decades. And in the middle of all this conflict comes Osamu Adachi, a young boy who's graduating from middle school, going on to high school, a very important step in his life, especially in Japan, where Japanese high school is essentially American college. Amongst all of this, he meets a strange man who's named Hibiki, who fights the Makumo as an Oni. Osamu witnesses one of these battles and becomes inspired by Hibiki to grow as a person, eventually passing his high school entrance exams because of Hibiki's influence, and later on starts learning more personal lessons from Hibiki, learning what it means to be an Oni, and potentially succeeding Hibiki as, well, Hibiki, because Hibiki's an inherited title. Even the current Hibiki, his original name wasn't Hibiki. He just inherited that name from the previous Hibiki. Again, there's this theme of legacy that goes into Hibiki. I wonder how many times I can say Hibiki. Anyway, from the explanation, you can obviously guess that this is a very more personal journey. That did not make any sense, but I'm keeping it in anyway. This is a very personal journey, especially for Asumu, who's basically our main character. That's weird. The main writer isn't our main character, is in fact this little kid who is just close to the main writer. That's different. Yes, Asumu is very much framed as the main character. So, him and his influences from Hibiki basically are the plot. The Makumo are basically a background element who just exists for the sake of a conflict. The Makumo are more treated like yokai in this story. They're naturally occurring monsters that just happen to eat humanity. Unlike even going back to the previous season with Blade, in which the undead were straight up unkillable machines of death and destruction who fought for the sake of their own kind and supremacy of the planet. The Makumo don't really want to conquer the world. They just want to eat stuff. And so, yeah, they need to eat. Humans are the main source of nutrition. You see what's going to happen there. Oh, this is Amazons before Amazons was a thing. Of course, we need a plot involving the Makumo, so strange things are going on in the mountains and forest, and, well, stuff happens that gets into the later parts of the series I don't want to talk about because, oh boy, we'll get to that when we get to that. And an interesting point is the fact that the Makumo all come in a set, or at least really early on they come in sets. There are at least 2 human-sized Makumo, one coded male, one coded female most of the time, and then a giant CGI monster that the 2 human-sized ones typically send humans to for it to feed on. One being a giant enemy crab that Hibiki fights in one episode, which, oh god, the CG did not age at all. It is terrible, but it is kind of funny to watch. Anyway, again, the Makumo aren't even the main thing in the series. The main thing is, focusing on our main characters. They're just a natural element of this world that exists and are the enemy faction for the series. As I've stated already, the actual focus of this show is on the characters, in particular the writers, or at least the people adjacent to said writers, such as Asumu, who's adjacent to Hibiki. And speaking of writers, technically speaking, this is the most amount of writers that we've had in a season since Hibiki, at least going canonically, in terms of release. Mainly because a lot of them are either learning from the previous generation of Oni and are teaching the next generation of Oni in their own way. So you have duplicates in a sense, but they have different names, like Todoroki as an example. But anyway, there are a good number of writers in this series because of the theme of legacy. And, well, I can't really discuss the suits. At least I can't discuss each individual suit like I did with Blade. So I'm going to break them down because you can easily break each of the Onis into 3 different types. Based on their element and their instrument, which coincide with one another. Unfortunately, we don't get mix and matches. Anyway, the Oni are all musically themed. Music, again, is a big part of the series. The Oni need a pure sound to transform, as well as to kill the Makumo, because Makumo can only be killed by a pure sound, or they're weakened by a pure sound, whatever that means. It's one of the things that they bring up in the series, but don't fully explain what it is. Kind of like how Blade does with Swordsman, but we're going to leave that till I talk about Blades, when I talk about Saber when that series ends. But breaking down the Oni types, we have fire Oni such as Hibiki, who typically use drums, or at least they use drum sticks as weapons to form drums. Not like the American marching band drums, the Japanese taiko drums, and I love the sound of a taiko drum. I love drums in general, but I really love the sound of a taiko drum. It just, it sounds so good. Next, we have wind Oni, like Hibiki, who can transform with small trumpets, or they use small trumpet-like weapons. Wind instruments, or specifically trumpets in Hibiki's case. They're cool, they control the wind, the typical wind ninja style stuff. I said ninja, I was thinking of Naruto. But next we have the electric Oni, like Todoroki, which is funny because I'm pretty sure most of you assume with that name by this. There's a My Hero joke in there. But anyway, we have the electric Oni like Todoroki, who use string instruments, specifically Todoroki's electric guitar, which is weird, but I love it. I honestly love Todoroki's electric guitar, especially when he uses it in a fight. Each of the riders in the series fall into one of these three categories. And another thing I should mention is that the riders don't transform with belts. Instead, they typically transform with small devices that can create a sound that will transform them into their Oni form. In Hibiki's case, he uses a small tuning fork that he puts to his he doesn't put to his forehead. Okay, so he bangs it against the surface and then puts the tuning fork to his forehead in order to transform into Hibiki. Todoroki will use a small string inside of an armlet that will create a sound that transforms him into Todoroki, and Hibiki will blow on a small flute that will create a sound that transforms him into Hibiki. Again, they don't transform with belts, and they're tied to their musical motif, or music in general. Again, the pure sound thing, which is never fully explained in the show. And let's talk about the Oni suits in particular. So, Kamen Rider suits, there's a way I differentiate them in my head from Sentai suits. Sentai suits feel like uniforms. They're supposed to be armor, but you can obviously tell they're kind of like latex. They feel like a kind of uniform, which goes into the Super Sentai name, because Sentai means squad, or at least it can translate into squad, meaning the team is called Super Squad. Again, it makes sense. So it all fits within the theme of their suits being uniforms that they use. Rider suits feel, especially in the Heisei era, like armor. Armor that you don to protect yourself when you're fighting or give you power to fight. But Hibiki doesn't feel like that at all. The Hibiki suits feel like an odd mix between a Sentai suit and a rider suit for me. And I kind of love it. Well, in series, these aren't even suits. They're transferred, like, in other seasons, they're suits that they put on what they transform onto, or the suits appear on them as they transform. In Hibiki's case, they're literally mutating and transforming to get these rider forms, or Oni forms, which is why they feel sleeker, not bulky at all. They have this kind of natural aesthetic to them. And early in the season, Hibiki can open his mouth to breathe fire, which is a very Gills-like scenario. Oh god. I just mentioned Gills and got sad again. But yeah, they are fully transformed into what this series calls an Oni. So it's not armor. They do have armor. Hibiki does gain armor in his further forms. Around his Oni form, he becomes an armored Oni. I'm thinking about Gaim early, but it's still not like a suit. In series, it's a metamorphosis, an actual transformation, instead of just putting on a suit of armor like most other rider suits are. Again, I like it all, but just specifying things in terms of this. And again, it still works for the series. In fact, it honestly helps Hibiki stand out more in all the anniversary group shots. Like, you can obviously tell, you can tell which suit is which, but you can obviously tell the Hibiki suit is different from all the other suits when you're, even with the passing knowledge of just looking at all the suits, you can tell, oh, that one looks weird, because it feels different, because it doesn't feel like an armor. And again, it all just works for itself. But that's all the good that we can say so far. Because now let's dig into what Hibiki's infamously known for, the staff change. So, I don't know specifically why. I'm going to personally assume it was possibly low toy sales. Because typically when the sales are low, this is when Toei will step in and start doing stupid stuff. In this case, Hibiki had a staff change. the main writer, series director, and a lot of the writing staff were switched out for other people. I'm not naming names here, but it was a very particular name within the Kamen Rider series. Anyway, they were all swapped out and replaced after episode 30, which is the last episode that was directed by the original director of the show. So everyone was changed out, and a new team came rolling in. And there were some obvious changes with this. One of them was the introduction of a new character, and forgive me if I mispronounce his name, Kyosuke Kuria. It looks like it's pronounced that way. I'm sorry if I mispronounced it. Anyway, he shows up, and he feels different from everyone else in the show. Everyone else feels more natural, like actual people, although somewhat overblown, such as Asuma's mother, but still like natural people. Kiria doesn't feel that way. He feels like he was written, not natural. And not because the fact it was another young actor, because okay, it might be I'm not that good with that kind of thing. But again, it feels like he's different from everyone else, and that's intentional. He just comes in and sort of acts as a juvenile rival to Asumu for Hibiki's attention. In fact, they begin competing for the right to succeed Hibiki as Hibiki. And, well, the show would slowly shift over time to be a more typical Rider series, with less mountain shooting, less of the riders going to the mountains to hunt down Makumo, and more Makumo doing straight up attacks. Literally, everyone will tell you, if you decide to watch this show, that Hibiki is really interesting and different up until episode 30. You can basically stop, and after experiencing it, I can understand why. It feels like a completely different show because it almost is a completely different show. Hibiki is a controversial series as a whole. Its beginning is often contested if it's even good or not. I personally fall on the side that its beginning is pretty good. The early series is slow, yes, but it's still well written, has a lot of good character moments, and even though it doesn't focus on the battle aspect, which drew me into Kamen Rider, its character stories are small time and relatable. It's not a save the world plot like most Rider seasons eventually turn out to be. It's just a small stake story about a dude teaching a kid what it means to grow up. Oh, I didn't mention that, but Asumu doesn't have a dad, and that's kind of a big part about why he's drawn to Hibiki, because Hibiki kind of serves as a father figure for him. I didn't mention it because I forgot to write it down. It feels so mundane, because Hibiki does feel like a mundane series. And you can honestly joke, especially with all the mountain shots, that Hibiki is the original laid-back camp. Because, mountain camping, which is another big thing in Hibiki. And I know I haven't commented a lot about the characters or the plot or specifics, or even gone into that in depth, but Hibiki is a story about growing up. A story that a lot of people have heard, probably will hear again, all that kind of stuff. And, well, like every story about growing up, it's hard to explain it without actually watching it. Because you could just say, it's a story about growing up. Well, okay. And Hibiki is a story about growing up, specifically Asumu growing up as he follows Hibiki, striving to be better and work harder because of him, as well as the theme of passing a torch that basically exists throughout the course of Hibiki. There is controversy because Asumu eventually decides to give up on becoming an Oni and basically becomes a doctor, and that's fine. It feels like it comes out of nowhere. There's a lot of stuff about Asumu's dad in there too, which again feels pretty forced. Again, this happens after episode 30 to my memory. But again, I like Hibiki. At least I like early Hibiki. After episode 30, it's a completely different show, and it doesn't feel like the two blend well together. Apparently, even a lot of the actors had difficulties after episode 30, but again, that's only apparently I'm only getting this stuff secondhand from like way back machine shit. But anyway, yeah, Hibiki is a weird one. I'll say it was a fun time if you know what you're going into. It's a slow show that has a very vast dip in quality after episode 30. It's very controversial, and well, it's a weird one, but I kind of like it because it's weird. I honestly would like to see a version of Hibiki that stayed true to the original vision from the original production staff and writers. Like Kamen Rider has a lot of sequel manga and light novels. There's even a remake of Kuga that's in the manga right now. I don't know if that's actually wrapped up or not. And I honestly would like to see Toei approach the original writers, or maybe the original producer, and ask him to write a manga of Hibiki. I'm sure that by now, Hibiki has had his own fan base grow who would love to have seen how the show was originally intended to have ended. This is something that obviously, as an American fan of Kamen Rider, I would never get my hands on because it's always going to be in Japan until Toei decides to start importing that too to see if they can maybe make some money off of it. Speaking of Toei making money, if you do want to try Hibiki out, the first 2 episodes of it are available on Toei's World Toku channel on YouTube, where you're watching this if you are watching this. So you don't have to go to Straight to Kiss Asian or any other sketchy website in order to check on if you want to watch Hibiki. You can watch the first 2 episodes on YouTube and then go to the sketchy sites because they don't leave us any other choice to do that if we want to continue to watch these shows. I'm not doing a Hibiki movie. I know it's written by the same guy who did the rest of the series after episode 30, so I know it's not going to be that good. And I just want to go straight into Kabuto because I want to talk about Kabuto now. I mean, not now. There's other videos I want to do first. But yeah, I'll see you guys next time. The next Rider series will be Kabuto, but that will not be the next video. So don't ask me when Kabuto. It's coming. Kabuto will come eventually. I'm just not as fast as Kabuto is.